The Arizona sun beat down on Route 66 that Thursday afternoon when Margaret Holloway pulled her old pickup truck onto the shoulder behind a gleaming black Mustang with its hood up and steam rising like a prayer into the desert sky. She was 58 years old and her hands were calloused from 20 years of working at Eddie's Auto Repair in town. Her late shift didn't start for another 2 hours and she had always believed that passing by someone in need was the same as causing the trouble yourself. The man standing beside the Mustang looked like he had just stepped out of a business meeting. His navy suit was expensive and his Italian shoes were collecting dust. He was younger than Margaret by maybe 10 years and he had the kind of worried expression that came from not knowing the first thing about what was under that hood. "Looks like you could use some help," Margaret said as she approached. The man turned and relief washed over his face. "I don't know what happened. One minute I was driving fine and the next minute the temperature gauge shot up and I had to pull over." Margaret smiled gently. "Mind if I take a look?" "Please," he said stepping back. "I'm Richard by the way. Richard Sterling." "Margaret," she replied already leaning over the engine. The heat rising from it didn't bother her much. She had felt worse in the summer garage where she worked. She could see the problem right away. A burst radiator hose. Not the end of the world but enough to strand someone who didn't know their way around an engine. "Your radiator hose gave out," she explained. "Happens more than you'd think especially in this heat. You got a spare?" Richard shook his head looking embarrassed. "I don't even know what that is if I'm being honest." Margaret chuckled warmly. "That's all right. Most folks don't. I've got some supplies in my truck. We can patch this up enough to get you to town at least." As she walked back to her pickup, Richard noticed her clothes. Worn jeans with grease stains that wouldn't wash out. A faded plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Steel-toed boots that had seen better days. This was a woman who worked with her hands and he felt a wave of gratitude that she had stopped. Margaret returned with a length of hose and some clamps. She set to work without any fuss cutting away the damaged section and fitting the new piece in place. Her movements were practiced and sure. "You do this for a living?" Richard asked, watching her work. 20 years at Eddie's Auto Repair in town," she said, not looking up. "Started there after my husband passed. Needed to support my daughter and it turned out I had a knack for it." "I'm sorry about your husband," Richard said quietly. "Thank you," Margaret replied. "It was a long time ago now. 15 years. But some days it still feels like yesterday." As she tightened the last clamp, Richard noticed something that made him pause. On Margaret's left hand was a ring. Not her wedding band which she wore on a chain around her neck. This was different. A gold ring with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. It was an unusual piece. Distinctive. And Richard felt his heart begin to race because he recognized it. Margaret finished the repair and stood up, wiping her hands on a rag she had brought. "That should hold you until you can get to a proper mechanic. Make sure you keep an eye on that temperature gauge. If it starts to climb again, pull over right away." "How much do I owe you?" Richard asked, reaching for his wallet. Margaret waved him off. "Nothing. Just passing along a kindness. Someone helped me once when I needed it and I figure that's how the world is supposed to work." But Richard wasn't reaching for money. He was pulling out his phone and scrolling through photos. When he found what he was looking for, he turned the screen toward Margaret. "That ring on your finger," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Where did you get it?" Margaret looked down at her hand, surprised. She had worn the ring for so long she barely noticed it anymore. It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died." "Why do you ask?" Richard's hands were shaking as he showed her the photo. It was an old picture from maybe 30 years ago. A young couple on their wedding day. The bride wore a beautiful dress and on her finger was the exact same ring Margaret was wearing. "That's my mother," Richard said softly. "That's the ring my father gave her when they got married. She lost it 40 years ago. We never knew what happened to it." Margaret stared at the photo, feeling the world tilt slightly. She sat down on the bumper of her truck, needing to steady herself. "I don't understand," she said. "My mother said this ring had been in our family for generations. She said her grandmother gave it to her mother and her mother gave it to her." Richard sat down beside her. "What was your mother's name?" "Dorothy," Margaret said. "Dorothy Hayes before she married. She grew up in Phoenix." Richard closed his eyes and nodded. "My mother's name was Catherine Sterling." They were best friends. I remember Mom talking about Dorothy all the time when I was little. They grew up together like sisters. He pulled up another photo on his phone. Two young women with their arms around each other laughing at the camera. One of them Margaret recognized immediately even across the decades. It was her mother, young and full of life before illness had taken her too soon. Mom lost the ring at a 4th of July picnic, Richard continued. She was devastated. My father had saved for months to buy it for her. They searched everywhere but never found it. My mother found a ring at a picnic that summer, Margaret said slowly, the memory coming back. She was just a teenager. She tried to find the owner but nobody claimed it. Eventually she decided it must have been meant for her to find. She wore it her whole life. They sat there in silence for a long moment, letting the weight of the coincidence settle over them. Your mother, Margaret said. Catherine, is she? She passed away 2 years ago, Richard said. Cancer. But she lived a good long life. 87 years. Right up until the end she would tell stories about her friend Dorothy. She missed her so much after your family moved away. My mother talked about Catherine too, Margaret said. She always regretted that they lost touch. Life just got in the way, I suppose. Richard looked at the ring on Margaret's finger. That ring meant the world to my mother. But you know what? I think she would have loved knowing that Dorothy had it. That it brought her comfort and joy. And now here it is with Dorothy's daughter. That feels right somehow. Margaret touched the ring gently. I've worn this since my mother died. It helped me feel close to her during the hard times. After my husband passed and I was trying to figure out how to keep going. This ring reminded me that I came from strong women who survived difficult things. Then it's exactly where it should be, Richard said firmly. Please keep it. Wear it with my blessing and my mother's too, I think. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. That's very generous of you. It's not generous, Richard said. It's right. My mother would have wanted her best friend's daughter to have it. And besides, you just saved me from being stranded in the desert. I think that earns you the right to keep a family heirloom. They both laughed at that and the tension of the moment broke. Richard stood and offered his hand to help Margaret up. Can I at least buy you dinner? There must be a decent place to eat in town. Margaret smiled. There's a diner called Rosie's. Best meatloaf in 3 counties. I'd be happy to show you the way. As they drove in convoy back to town, Margaret following behind to make sure Richard's car didn't overheat again, she thought about the strange paths life takes. Two friends separated by time and distance connected again through their children in a ring that had been lost and found again. Her mother used to say that there were no coincidences, only appointments we didn't know we had made. Margaret had never been sure she believed that, but today on this dusty stretch of highway with the sun beginning its descent toward the mountains, she thought maybe her mother had been right all along. At Rosie's diner they sat across from each other in a red vinyl booth and talked for 3 hours. Richard told her about his mother's life, about the advertising company she had built from nothing, about her laugh and her kindness and her strength. Margaret told him about Dorothy, about the way she had faced poverty and illness with grace, about how she had taught her daughter that helping others was never a burden but a privilege. When they finally said goodbye in the parking lot, Richard hugged her tightly. Thank you, he said, for stopping today, for fixing my car, for giving me this gift of knowing where that ring ended up. Thank you, Margaret replied, for letting me keep it, for sharing your mother's story with me. As she drove home that evening, Margaret looked down at the ring on her finger. It caught the last light of the day and sparkled like it held all the love and friendship and connection that had passed through it over the years. She thought about 2 young women laughing at a picnic decades ago. She thought about a ring lost and found. She thought about a stranded man and a chance meeting on a desert highway. And she thought that maybe kindness really was the thread that held the world together after all.